Hello everyone, Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today I brought in Brian, who is a veteran of the Final Fantasy XIV, not just the Final Fantasy XIV, but the Final Fantasy XI, which is the game that came before 14 as well, because I wanted to talk about this add-on slash mod situation from the perspective of someone, because like I came from a different game, right? I came from World of Warcraft. This is not a secret. Most people be aware of it. And this is a game that has not only been plagued by the add-on situation. As a matter of fact, in a recent interview, one of the lead developers was very transparent about it, which actually surprised a lot of people in the community, where he just straight up said, yes, we do develop around these add-ons because add-ons do trivialize our raiding content. And this is something that all of us talked about, how about you need a bunch of add-ons to raid in World of Warcraft, and how that is a problem, and it becomes like a barrier, particularly to newer players. But in 14, it was one of the most refreshing things for me when I initially started raiding in 14, like even just doing normal content, is that you don't need any of that because the game does a really good job of communicating this stuff to you. And now I have the added perception of someone who's also been doing extreme content and savage content, in which I also have not been using any add-ons. I don't need no CACBot callouts or whatever the hell that thing is called. The one thing that we do use, though, I will admit, is ACT, but mostly for self-improvement. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. And that's essentially where a lot of this, it just legitimately hits the fan this last week. So in terms of it, like, let's define it by its rules first, so everybody's on the same page. Any form of add-on, that's even GShape, that's even anything that like impacts the game, is strictly prohibited on the terms of service. And Yoshi P's stance officially up to pretty much this point, nothing has changed this week. Only Yoshi P basically vocalized it, especially after a lot of people were saying that people are cheating for the ultimate world first, and thus becomes the biggest source of contention. So terms of service act is not allowed. None of these things are allowed. GShape, it doesn't matter. Yoshi P goes on to say that they're going to look into these add-ons and see what functionality they can bring in, because clearly, like when you see, like in terms of act on self-improvement alone, people use these tools to also self-improve. And some people will use these tools to be assholes, and that's just the nature of humanity. But we have to establish they're all not permitted, no matter what, in Final Fantasy 14. So Yoshi P's official public stance has been like, they're not allowed. Just don't talk about them. We don't talk about Fight Club. Don't go from like showing it off. And over the course of the last couple of years, like that's kind of been like, well, I'm not talking about it in game. And that's where, when you see kind of the shift happen over the last couple of years, it happened actually first and foremost with like, don't be an asshole in game. So people were being an asshole on social media. And we saw streamers like Authors and Xenos like have a suspension because of that. They were doing something on their stream that then constituted the violation of terms. And now that we're seeing the exact same thing happen in terms of add-ons, and we've seen, and this is how I've described it, I see it as like two people in the wrong trying to fight out who's the more right out of that. And so you see that you have streamers that are kind of thumbing their nose at the developers, like, what are you going to do? Right. Like, and then you have people who are like witch hunting, going to like into people's VODs and be like, oh, you see, they use this add-on that does pop-ups. Let's report them. And where I kind of fall in all of this in terms of it is that I know the team's going to be working on adding in these things. I think essentially it is the time to not push the bar and push back on Square Enix, because I think that puts Yoshi P and the team in a hard situation. And I think when that comes down to it, they're gonna just sit here and say like, all right, we're gonna just go and become harder lined on this because of the various different stances. It's a weird thing because, like you mentioned with Final Fantasy XI, right now 11 is massively supported by the add-on community. Massively supported. We're talking HD textures. We're talking features and tools where the game and the devs don't really like add in these things. So the add-ons come out of a necessity of things that people feel they need, or they make the game better. And then Square Enix has not, in my opinion, been doing their due diligence to be able to say, oh, here's what's being coming in. And this becomes a massive gray issue, a massive concern, because essentially now is that in his communication of they're going to evaluate these add-ons, what happens in the next round where okay, we added in those features, and the people still like, oh, if we had to do this, like, is this going to be this constant cycle? What is the ultimately right call to be made? And as a player who didn't come from WoW, and I do appreciate when I've heard people give the feedback of, oh, I can just go play your game. It's got everything I need. I don't have to go install 1,000 different add-ons just to have the experience that I want. And add-ons in a way are like free development for the studio. And so Blizzard has benefited greatly from them. But like you confirmed, they design around them, where in 14's case, and the fact that it's also in console, you have an environment of, and we've had this environment for the longest time of, you have those who violate the terms so they can get better, and you have those who follow the terms and they get excluded because they're playing by the rule in which GShape set. So I think that I think there's grave mistakes that have been made in terms of communication, in terms of not building out these tools that are clearly needed. Like you and I, like I've used ACT in the past for self-improvement because the game doesn't necessarily give me that in the information and tools that I need. I don't care for a real-time damage meter. I don't. Like, I think it's pointless. What I like is the after the content statistical analysis. Like, tell me that like XIV analysis is an amazing tool that requires you to parse, that requires you to use ACT, but it will give you so much insight on how to improve at your job. Why is that not in the game? And that becomes a real tricky problem because people will feel like they're going to be abused if they add in some kind of tools. Again, not real time, but after the fact, a personalized, like, info dump to you that, oh, someone's going to like send me your screenshot. I got news for everybody. You're already being excluded. People are already looking at your logs that you got parsed on that you didn't upload. So like that, in my worldview, it's a non-issue. It's a non-starter because that already happens, and it's happening without you actually getting good information to actually improve if you want to. What's your take?
I mean, my take on it is I actually read something on Reddit. I was going through those multiple threads that were in Reddit because I don't usually browse Reddit that much.
Wild.
But I watched your video and I was like, oh, let me check out some of these threads and see what people are saying. And there was actually one comment in there that I really liked, which is someone basically said, okay, look, clearly it wasn't exactly like this, but the implied thing was, okay, look, we don't need damage meters in dungeons. Okay, like experts, they're not challenging. Let's get real. Like maybe for a brand new player, maybe they'll struggle a little bit to understand it. But once you get down to it, like dungeons, they're not challenging at all. Most of the 4-man content in the game, super easy to do, right? So you don't need damage meters there. It doesn't matter if someone's like gray parsing, if someone has -10, if they're actually healing the enemies, you'll still get through it with the other 2 people, right? But
they're actively working against you.
Even if they're active, you can clear the content with 3 people. It's fine. But when you get, you shouldn't have to, because I know that some people quote this out of context, like, "Oh, you're saying that you don't have to try." You shouldn't have to. You should try and improve yourself as best as you possibly can, naturally. But where you do need the damage meters is in like potentially extreme content. Even extreme, I'm a little bit, extreme's not that hard either. Once you get some of the strategies down, it's hard the first couple of attempts, but even then.
It's a dance. Once you learn the steps of the dance, like then all you're asking is for your 7 other partners to like understand the dance.
And the damage thresholds that you have to meet in extreme are also fairly reasonable. They're not a big problem for the most part, I don't think. But when you go to Savage and when you go, I'm assuming when you go to Ultimate, because I've never done Ultimate, right? But when you go to Savage, then the damage thresholds really begin to play a part in what you're doing. So what if you just had damage, like some kind of a damage meter specifically for that content? Because that way you don't have people, potentially harassing other people in the more casual content. And, when in the more hardcore content, you can like analyze things and actually discuss it. Because like, for instance, in my static, we discuss this stuff as in, okay, listen, clearly you're not dealing the damage you're supposed to be dealing. How can we fix this? Maybe you need the different gear. Let's look at your BIS. Let's look at your rotation. Like that's the way that we approach it in my static. Naturally, not everybody's going to be like that. Some people are just going to be like, damage, not good. Bye. Let's get a new one. Right.
Right. But I think that's where like
you can't avoid
I would take your idea and just say, if it's a pre-made party, I don't care the content, even if it's in dungeons. If it's if you're like, we all get together, we're all on this, then it can be enabled, as opposed to like, you're right. Cause like in a random RNG thing, like, that's information that people will end up using in a way. And that's why I don't care for real time. Like you clear or you quit the content, and then it's like, hey, here's the report. But you were finishing your thought. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was basically it. Like that would be a good opportunity to put the damage meters in a content where it is relevant without necessarily leading to as much harassment, but also allowing players to make certain decisions. At the end of the day, we're all big boys, and ultimately what you should do, big boys and girls,
Yeah.
sorry. But ultimately what you should do is like, look, if somebody harasses you over ACT or whatever, you report them and you get over it, and if somebody gets banned, they get banned. They should never harass somebody else based on damage numbers because it's a ridiculous thing to do to begin with. But on top of it, there's another thing, which is there's also the add-ons. Like I've seen add-ons that I didn't even know existed because I knew that call-outs existed because I had heard it in other streamers' stuff, right? Naturally, I don't go out and report those streamers. Do whatever the hell you want. It's none of my business. I just think that shouldn't be a thing that should actually be.
What a real adult thing to think. It's like, it's not my circus, not my monkeys, man. I'm out of here.
but ultimately, it is also something that I wish wasn't in the game. And I think that should be like potentially a part of the rules. Like, look, if you're doing something that is making the content easier, and I kind of wish that there was just a line that we could draw. And it would just be like, listen, if this affects the difficulty of an encounter, bannable offense, all of that stuff. If it does not affect the difficulty of an encounter, so let's say GShape. GShape doesn't affect difficulty. GShape is for people to do G-pose and, just make the visuals look better, right? That doesn't affect the difficulty of an encounter. Even ACT, just a base version of ACT, it doesn't actually affect the difficulty of an encounter. It just allows you to look at the damage that people are doing. I don't think it's, again, that big of a deal. And there's plenty of add-ons like that I personally don't use because like I play also on the PlayStation 5, so I try to keep things as add-on free as possible.
And also the same across like your experience, right? And
yeah,
that's
exactly.
the thing within the thing. It's like I think the real culprit here is that we've got a bad terms of service that hasn't been enforced, that all of a sudden started getting enforced because it actually, the reason why it existed is essentially to try and prevent the issues that aforementioned of people who are cheating and who are using different things and different tools to try and get ahead and get a winning edge. And how that essentially is that you have the haves and the have-nots, and you have the people who've been following the terms and you have people who haven't. And essentially this kind of like, don't ask, don't tell, like, okay, just don't show it off and don't be like about it in game. I don't think really suffices to say, despite how big the community has grown and how many people are enjoying the game itself. And so Yoshi P hits it, I think, right when he talks about he's going to review these add-ons and bring that features in, but that should have been happening years ago. But we can't go back in time. We can't sit here like we can't, to sit here and be like, okay, well, he didn't do it years ago, we're going to just be mad at him today. No. But what we need to see from him is as a plan, he needs to go in and talk about and be as direct as possible when it comes down to it. Because right now, based off of how the community has reacted, though, it's like I would say that no add-ons should be allowed, even privately. Like it's like to the point where we've seen massive cheating within PvP. And the only way to really prevent that is to actually get something like, EAC or something like that on computers, anti-cheat software to detect what's actually running and then essentially be able to report that. Because right now they're not scanning your computer. So it's always kind of been this, in a weird way, a hush hush, Fight Club, that the Fight Club grew so large that it literally is the way you play that kind of end game, which means that if you were playing on PlayStation, you're needing somebody to be on PC so that that you can be parsing, that you can improve, so that you can get better, so you can do this content, so you can't be excluded. And so at the end of the day, I think we've long passed the point of no return, and Square Enix is going to be in a difficult position because of their position, because of their terms of service, and because of their lack of a real response to why are these add-ons being created in the first place. And it's that people find that there are features that their game needs. Now, Yoshi P has also commented that Square Enix will spare no expense on the future of Final Fantasy XIV. So there's hope to be had for sure, but it's hope that's going to be married with patience. And if people keep poking at the bear, that's the phrase that we've been using on this and for this whole situation, I feel like the line's going to be drawn real hard, real fast. And unfortunately, just like with any kind of change, and this is funny because it wasn't a change, it just is an enforcement. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, they didn't even change anything.
Nothing
It's just
changed. It just
they just enforced it, and I'm
right. It's
actually
like when a Congress passes a law that's like, okay, we're gonna do this, but we're not gonna fund it. So no one's really like it's the law's on the books, but there's no enforcement of it. Now the enforcement of it is actually going on, and people are getting hit. And then you kind of have that, again, two sides both wrong. People violating terms. That's you're violating the terms. You've agreed to them. You also have people then are witch hunting people who are violating the terms. And I don't think that's a good situation or a good look on the community.
Yeah, but there's a problem there that I want to circle back to, which is the whole thing about the Japanese. I heard that there's a Japanese player got banned, but before we get to that,
more streamers have gotten banned since then. So,
I wanted to tell you about the EAC situation. This is one of those situations because I've seen people talk about EAC, and let me tell you, I played Elden Ring on PC. They implemented EAC. And for starters, it's my understanding that people were just able to turn it off and run the game anyway. But I didn't mess around with that. But like I've seen in plenty of places people like, yeah, I turned it off. But most importantly, most of the people that turned it off were then reporting, oh, the game actually runs way better without EAC. So EAC actually has a lot of problems when it comes to game performance. Because, for instance, I remember that EAC is also used in Lost Ark, and Lost Ark always ran like ass on my computer, and I have a pretty good computer. It's like because of Lost Ark running bad, I was like, I don't know what's going on with this game. Then I get Elden Ring, and I play Elden Ring, and I'm like, oh wow, this also runs terrible, and it's also using EAC. So EAC has a serious problem in terms of performance, and if you couple that together with what people so lovingly call spaghetti code of Final Fantasy XIV, I think you're going to have a real issue. So this is not necessarily something that you really want to get down into.
This is not a quick fix, but they're like Yoshi P asking nicely. I think we've reached the point of that. I don't think that.
Yeah, that's just not gonna work because the game has grown. Ever since the Asmongold effect, so to speak, the game has just grown.
Even before that, with every WoW expansion, we've seen waves of waves, and that's the thing that people are like trying to blame. That's the thing that I don't understand is that people are trying to blame WoW players. And I go, look around. Like, how many people, like, I think it's like anybody, I honestly think the person going, like, it's the WoW players. It's like, yeah, if you go look at that person's history, like, they got thousands of hours in WoW. Like, who, like, outside of myself, who really didn't get into WoW and only really spent the most time I spent in WoW was in Shadowlands, which was unfortunate.
Yeah, that was very unfortunate.
But like that, I've never been in WoW player. It was the Final Fantasy 11, Final Fantasy 14. I touched WoW like for I'll see what this is about. And I was like, not really for me. And then essentially but then you go look at the majority of the Final Fantasy base. It's like, I think the people shouting against the WoW players that are the loudest are former WoW players. That's just I don't have evidence of it, but that's just kind of the theory. Cause it's like, well, they came from somewhere.
It's like people don't seem to have this notion that, oh, this community is perfect. And it's the same thing. There's a lot of criticism, say for instance, of the Souls community and a lot of criticism of the Monster Hunter community. And it's like, I don't think that these are communities that are toxic. I think that these are communities that have bad apples. Very much the same thing in Final Fantasy XIV, very much the same thing in World of Warcraft. Every community has the good apples and the bad apples. It doesn't matter which community you're talking about. It's like, sure, the community of Final Fantasy XIV, incredibly wholesome, all of that stuff at the same time. Community of Final Fantasy XIV got upset when I asked healers to heal and they called me a gray parser. It's like, there's bad apples and good apples. It doesn't really matter.
And that's really like where you kind of see some of the conversation shift and where this comes out. And so like the solution in my mind for like to avoid toxicity is basically like have a game like Candy Crush. Like it's easy. Nothing's pushing back on you, right? But like in 14, you see that come out in PvP and you see that come out in difficult content. And it's the same for every other game. As soon as the game is going to push back on you, then essentially you have to ask yourself a lot of questions. And a lot of people, rightfully and wrongfully, will, instead of looking internally at what they can do to improve, they usually look externally at what other people are doing wrong. And unfortunately, that I don't think is a recipe for greatness. I think if you are a great player, you actually look more at yourself and how you can improve before you look outward and say, oh, the reason why we're not winning is clearly, like everybody, like if I got into a group and 7 other people continue to just walk off the edge, well, then I think that would be a fair assessment to say like, well, we'd win if we'd stop, walking off the edge. But like if we're participating, could I have avoided that AoE? Could I have done better on this so that somebody didn't have to heal me? So that, like, it's a multiplayer game. And I think people sometimes have this entitlement that they should be able to clear all the content.
Yeah.
And when they're faced with the reality that the content will require them to put in work or to actually be social, turns out they're really not really a fan of MMORPGs. And I think that's the bigger kind of theme that I see, especially within the genre, is that while WoW rocketed MMORPGs into the spotlight where people were afraid that this is going to be the new drug, a new cocaine, that people are going to be addicted, they weren't going to ever leave their homes, they're always going to be stuck in their virtual world. Like in the grand scheme of things, what it ended up doing is it just brought a lot of people into the genre who actually don't like to be like multiplayer games, and they still say they like MMORPGs, but as long as they can be played completely solo, and that the game makes them feel like a real winner, and that's just not going to be the way of it. And you see that drama come out when all of a sudden you're reminded that there are other people who are playing it. Don't be a toxic casual, and don't be a toxic elitist. Like, I guess the answer is like, just don't be an asshole. Like,
yeah, just treat other people. Treat other people like you'd like to be treated. But it's
if you
funny.
don't like somebody, you can just go play with somebody else. Like, it's like, we don't need to make a thing out of it.
It actually is interesting that you said that a lot of people feel entitled to do content, and then they realize,
we saw it with Elden Ring. Like,
that's what I was going to bring up.
Like, not every game's for everybody, like I don't know, maybe that's just the fact that I don't have time to play every game. I don't know where that, like, I just never was like, well, yeah, like, games are made, different games for different people. Just because it's popular doesn't mean.
I think an important thing to bring up to this add-on discussion, there's this conversation around how much you need an add-on in order to clear content. And it's like, I feel like part of that sentiment may come a little bit from World of Warcraft, because people did get used to basically having to use DBM and stuff like that, which is, it's not mandatory, but it's like you're gonna suck for a long time until you understand a fight, unless you're not using DBM, because it is developed around DBM. And for most raiding guilds, it's just flat out mandatory. So it becomes like de facto mandatory, whether you like it or not. Right? In this game, it doesn't work like that, because the content actually is tested. So there's an actual team of 8 people at Creative Business Unit 3 that run this content and test it to see that it can be done. Whereas, for instance, in World of Warcraft, that actually doesn't happen. So they run the content, but like they modify the values of their characters so that they can run the content with 2 people instead of 20, and they do number simulations. And then it turns out when the raid actually comes out and guilds go fight the raid, Blizzard's like, oh, we need to balance this. This is not good. This doesn't work on a live environment, right? This does not happen with 14. So you can't really say, oh, I need this add-on. You don't.
Well, yeah. And I think that's where, like, when you think about it, you could extrapolate this argument to the concept of the minimap, is that people feel like they need it because they use it in other games, and maybe they get some kind of efficiency and some value out of it. But in the end of it, like, you don't need it. Like, there's other methods you can do that. And Ghost of Tsushima says hello. It's like, there are ways in which that, like, okay, you feel like you need it because you've had it and you're used to it, but it actually isn't the case in that regard. It's the same kind of concept. Like, yeah, they probably have become addicted to this and they feel like it's their safety blanket. But in reality, like, you take that away and you put enough time into it, I think eventually you come to the realization, like, oh, I don't need that. I was using that as this, and it was actually holding me back from improving and actually using my senses in that regards. Now, there could be an argument for somebody who has disabilities and is impaired in some way to be able to have that tool to be able to do that content, and then that comes back to that, should the game offer that as a feature as opposed to some third party person who's doing it, which opens up the risk, as GShape, to malware, all kinds of issues, and the fact that violating terms of service to play your game. Like, I think the devs should look into that, but I think that should have happened years ago, unfortunately.
So there was a team who cleared the Dragon Song Ultimate, and they had their video up on YouTube. And then that video, according to what I've seen so far, seems that it has been taken down by a DMCA request. And I don't understand. Are they still the world first? This is something that I wanted to ask you, because you're much more in tune with the community with that stuff, because I don't actually get it. Like, I've heard that it was TPS the team who defeated it first.
I
Because
think it was no. I think I mean it may be like it got all shifted around, but I heard it was somebody else, and I'm blanking on the name as we're
okay,
recording because I haven't read it, but saw it was somebody else. It wasn't TPS, and I was like, oh, that's great, that's interesting. My whole concern with that is the fact that we actually have basically two worlds first that are going on. You have the private world first that nobody can see, and then you have the public world first that's going on.
yeah,
And I think that ultimately sets back the whole community. Like if there's going to be a race, I think that if you want to participate in it, you need to be live because I think that puts everybody on the same playing field. And I think we've reached a point where if we want that world first and that spectacle to be a part of it, which benefits the game, it gets more people, more eyeballs, more conversation. You really have what's called the race for world second because right now everybody who's public is at a massive disadvantage from everybody who's privately doing their thing. And that's essentially where my problems with the world first. So essentially, when it comes down to it, I don't actually know if you're saying it's TPS now. Then maybe the people who did it first
I don't know. I have
wasn't
no
verified,
idea.
but I saw that it was somebody else, and I'm sorry. I apologize to the winners who I'm blanking on the name. And then I don't actually know the world first streamer either. But I did hear this week that the stream, the public first clear of the ultimate actually occurred, which was exciting.
Okay, but it's again it's just one of those situations where you're then left wondering because like there is the race to world first, but who actually won the race? Because I honestly at this point I don't know because somebody said it's this team, then the video got deleted,
People are now
then
saying
streamers got
cheating and this
banned.
and that, and that's
Yeah,
what really brings up this whole issue back into the spotlight, right? Like the whole thing is like GShape is like, well, we're this is what's happened, this etc. This is why we're against this. And yeah, and so you got people violating terms, getting world first, and I think essentially this will probably have Square Enix have to step further away from even celebrating a world's first raise, which is unfortunate. Like
yeah.
it's, I mean, from a marketing perspective, from getting the name out there and etc. Like this whole thing is just a mess.
It just makes me wonder like without us basically implementing an anti-cheat system there's no way to
Mhm.
stop stuff like this from happening, and even
Exactly.
after you implement the anti-cheat system there's probably still going to be ways around it, but it'll probably be less prevalent and whatnot. But it does kind of suck that we need to get to this level. I just really wish that ultimately the communities be like, hey, here's the way that it's intended, the difficulty intended for this content. Please don't try to circumvent the difficulty by adding
Right.
third-party tools, right?
Yeah, and that's the accusations that people are leveraging. The data mining being a constant
Yeah.
problem of people getting the information, and so essentially, yeah, it becomes a, if you don't slap it down, you're permitting it. It's like you can say, hey, don't do this, but if it's like, oh, the people who are doing it are getting ahead, it's the same problem that like at the Major League Baseball face, where it's like, okay, yeah, don't do steroids, and then it's like everybody's doing steroids. And so then it's like, okay, if you're not, like all of a sudden you're not able to like compete at that level. And so you kind of have, it's kind of like, well, you just kind of end up going along with it. And that's essentially, I think, the same kind of situation we have here. And so they have to have that hard line in the sand and they have to enforce it. Otherwise, people are just going to be like, well, if they're not going to enforce it, like, why am I setting myself up at a disadvantage because I'm competing now, right?
Yeah.
And it's all, and this is like a race is a PvP element, even in PvE content. And so that's where all this becomes
Yeah.
really sticky.
So none of us really have the answers. I think both of us agree it'd be great if people would just not use things that change the difficulty. That would be fantastic. But basically, Square Enix is going to draw a hard line in the sand. It looks like they're going to start enforcing it with more and more streamers getting banned. But, it is what it is. That's the situation. That's how both of us feel about it. And I just wanted to get some more context from someone who's been playing the game for longer than me. Has this been a problem like in the past before this? Because I feel like this obviously was brought up mostly because of the Race to World First of Dragon Song Ultimate. Was this something that happened during
like,
T?
I'm sure that some people got, pissy and got their, feelings hurt. But ultimately, like, this wasn't like, you go look at any of my like history. It's like, there's not like, oh my gosh, world first drama. Oh my gosh, savage drama. It's like, no. Like, people just kind of played and like everybody was like, well, they parse because that's kind of a part of it. But as the community has grown, I think essentially this has kind of come to that head. And the fact that, like, the fact that where the 14 has come from and where it is now, it has grown, and I think it's outgrown its kind of don't ask, don't tell policy.
Yeah. So you
yeah,
also you also feel like
the
add-ons themselves have been evolving as well then.
Oh, absolutely. Like, and I don't have any, but like people have called out Bellular and saying, because he used GShape to help improve the overall visual fidelity and quality of the looks. And you have the text chat pop-ups and all these little things that just overall improve the game and the experience for people. And that's, but that's like where we didn't have that, 5 years ago and 6 years ago. And so like over time, the tools have gotten better and more sophisticated, and there's a community that wants that. And it's the same kind of thing building off of the 11 thing. Like Square Enix isn't supporting the features that the community who plays their game wants. And so the add-on community has gone rampant, even though it is still a violation of the terms of service. So they have the same policy going on in 11. But I think it's just the fact that the community has grown so large in 14. You have more eyeballs. And then all of a sudden you have people kind of saying like, wait, why are they allowed to do this? But we're not allowed to do this. Or why can they do this? And I don't have that feature on console.
Yeah.
And then the response is like, well, that's where some of the drama kicks up, etc.
Today was the first time that I actually looked up CACBot because I was curious, and what I saw made it look just like BBM back in World of Warcraft, and I was like, oh my god, PTSD flashbacks, Jesus Christ, no. Why would you actively seek this? I actively seek to get away from it for as much as I can. But I think
follows you wherever you go, I guess. Yeah.
I think we're going to be calling it here, you guys. Those are our opinions on the subject. And you guys let us know if you enjoyed the video. In the comment section, hit up whether you like. There'll be a link to all of Brian. Well, not all of Brian's stuff, because you have like 50,000 channels. I'll link like...
Yeah, pretty much. just link Prime. Just link Ginger Prime. And that will get everybody where they need to go.
I always say I'm going to put all the links there, but I can't do that.
Oh, dude, no. That's
I'll fill up the full description.
On YouTube, you can just hit @Ginger Prime and people can click on the name and it'll take them where they want, because and what actually I'll hope to have a video out probably in the next couple of months going over why and how YouTube is broken.
It's the YouTube algorithm.
Well, I think I found a fix. Like, I think I have a way that, and I'm going to show it with numbers and data. I just need a couple more months of like testing and data to kind of like make sure that my theory is sound. And if it ends up proving out true, like, then essentially that's going to be what I advise people to do on YouTube, because clearly, like what I think I've discovered is absolutely working. And if it continues to work in that same degree, then that's essentially, I think, will be helpful for anybody who's thinking about creating content or anybody who's actively creating content. So hopefully that becomes a useful thing for people to experience here in the next couple months when I have enough data to really kind of highlight and show the details.
Breaking down the YouTube algorithm with Brian. Anyway, guys.
That's right. Peace.
We'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong. Stay safe. Peace out.